Chapter 24. If the inside of Sylvia's office didn't seem small enough the first time Jeremy had sat within it, with one added person, there feels to be very little room to even breathe. Jeremy is surprised that even after a week or so had passed, her office is still an unintelligible mess. Looking to Erin at his left, he notices her having trouble finding a way to situate herself in a comfortable manner. He too knows that struggle from before, and even more so today. Sitting across from them, with a smile flooding her face, Sylvia picks up her pen, and while she sits at attention, she rolls it between the fingers and thumb of her right hand. "So, Jeremy," she begins, "how about we just dive right in?" She allows the raising of a single eyebrow in curiosity. Jeremy doesn't answer right away. He just slowly rolls his head back and forth, switching focus between her and Erin. Knowing how to exactly explain the dreams to someone else without sounding insane is not something he thinks he has the ability to do. Also, he still isn't sure he really wants to share with her, even if he were to share with anyone outside of Erin. Tapping of Sylvia's pen against the pad of paper lying flat on her desk begins slowly. As she begins to slowly get irritated by the silence, the pace of the tapping begins to hasten. Faster and faster. The tapping goes as Jeremy sits in the silent confines of his own head. Rapping of the pen finally begins to get to him, and his breathing begins to raise in both volume and frequency. Sweat begins forming on his brows, and he finds his heart start to beat faster and faster to the rhythm of the tapping of the pen. "Well," Sylvia bursts out in frustration without allowing the smile to leave her face, "it seems as though we won't be getting anywhere like this, eh?" she says, turning her head from Jeremy and toward the pretty young girl to her right. It is obvious to everyone involved that Sylvia is not a fan of silence. Even if she's the only one speaking, words will be shed. "So," she elongates the word, "Erin, what can you tell me about these dreams of his?" she asks. Erin's eyes lock on Jeremy as she answers Sylvia. "I would, but he hasn't really shared them with me." Reaching over, Erin grabs a hold of Jeremy's hand and holds it firmly. Eyes red with many mixed emotions, nearly all negative and base, he clenches his teeth tightly behind his closed lips. "Please, Jeremy," Erin begins to plead with him. She just wants to help. A single tear quickly forms and falls from her eye. "We both want to help you." Taking his hand back, Jeremy closes both fists tightly. Holding his forearms to his thighs, he leans forward and takes a deep breath. "Okay," Jeremy speaks for the first time since they arrived in the office. "I'll tell you both about the dreams." He looks up slightly, but his hood still shields his eyes from the two women. The shadow only disperses just above his mouth, so this is all the ladies can see. "The first came out of nowhere," he begins his story. "I was just walking through darkness, not knowing where I was going." Leaning toward him slightly, both Erin and Sylvia listen in quiet intent. There were screams out in the distance, like someone was in pain. He raises his head a little more, revealing his eyes squeezed closed as he remembers the dream in great detail. "And I felt myself being drawn very strongly to the screams." His eyes wince in pain as he recalls the blood-curdling terror that had filled his ears that night. I couldn't find the source of the screams," he continues. "I searched the darkness for so long, but I just couldn't find who was screaming." Shaking his head slowly back and forth, he continues on with what he can recall of the first dream. "Then it got loud," he says. "Really loud. Like it was coming from all around me." He raises his head and opens his eyes. Looking back and forth between the other two, he finishes the description of his first dream. "It was then that I woke up, and it was over." "Okay," Sylvia speaks up after a moment of all-around silence and scoots back a little in her seat. "Do you want my professional opinion, or is there more?" she asks Jeremy. "Unfortunately," Jeremy answers back, "there is more. He reaches his hand under his hood and scratches at his scalp feverishly, pulling at his hair in frustration. The second dream I had, it was like the first. Jeremy begins to describe his second dream. Except, through the screams, I found a glow in the distance. His eyes closed once again, as again he reluctantly relives another of his dreams. I didn't want to go near the glow, but I could feel myself being forced toward it. He crosses his arms in front of his chest and tears at the sleeves around his upper arms. After what seemed like an eternity, I made it to the source of the glow. As he releases his hands from his sleeves and returns his forearms to his lap, allowing his hands to hang free. And there it was, right in front of me, the door. He reaches his hand out as he can vividly see the door again in his head. He jumps back in his chair, would have fallen backward to the floor if the door wasn't directly behind him to break his fall. Then the scream. He breathes heavily as all four legs of the chair once again meet the ground. The scream woke me up. His eyes dart around the room, as if it was warning me to stay away from the door. Shaking his head, he rubs his face with both hands. With skin of his face stretched downward, he continues on. I wish I had listened, he says as he tries to remember the details of the third dream. The next dream. He begins to describe the third of his dreams while the two ladies continue to sit in silence for the time being. I go through the door. He nervously looks between the other two. It led to my bathroom. Your bathroom? Sylvia asks. Another curious eyebrow raises over her left eye. Yes, Jeremy answers with full focus on her now. But it wasn't really my bathroom, obviously. The room looked identical to my bathroom, but the mirror... He pauses. Confused look spread across his face. He realizes now that this really was a bad idea. Standing hastily, he spins from his seat and grabs the handle of the door behind him, swinging it open and speedily making his exit before either of the two ladies could stop him. It is only a few steps from the room that he feels a tug on his sleeve. Turning quickly, he sees Aaron standing firm, trying unsuccessfully to hold back a couple of tears. Trying to stay angry, Jeremy forces a terrible scowl to his face. He is, however, unable to flash a hateful eye at her teary face for more than a second or two. Fine! Jeremy shouts in a huff and rushes back to Sylvia's office. Rushing up to her desk, he slams his open hands down on the scattered papers that spread across its surface. You want to know about the dreams? He shouts across the desk at Sylvia as she sits firm, letting on to no emotion. The room contains a mirror. The mirror has my reflection, but it's not me. It's an evil asshole who shows me my friends being brutally murdered by my father, who has been dead for over a month now. Are you happy now? Jeremy screams at the highest peak his voice would allow, and turns to walk out of the office. Yes, Jeremy hears Sylvia answer behind him, and pauses in his tracks. Not about what dreams you have had, she explains herself. Those sound just awful, and I'm sorry you have had to go through all that. Her face draws a concern. I am, however, happy that you decided to share. She smiles at him while leaning her head gently to the side. Jeremy shakes his head as she motions for him to take his seat. Do you at least want to know what I think? She asks. Jeremy looks back at Aaron, who stands just outside of the doorway with tears in her eyes, and reluctantly nods his head very slowly. There are 3 possibilities I can come up with in your rushed explanation of your dreams. She starts listing each off her fingers. The first is that they are just dreams, and you shouldn't worry about them. She sticks up her index finger. The second is that this is your mind's way of dealing with all the stress that has been surrounding you lately. She extends her middle finger along with the index. Or, it is possible that the mirror represents another side of you that you are keeping hidden. She extends her ring finger to join the others. Possibly a representation of heavily repressed homosexual urges? She finishes and begins to write these down in another notebook she quickly finds buried shallowly in the mess on the surface of her desk. Unsatisfied with her answers, Jeremy turns to leave again. "We could talk more if you want," she calls out to him as he slams the door heavily behind him on his way out of the office. "Or not," she says to herself as she turns to her computer monitor on the right side of her desk and begins typing on a partially hidden keyboard in front of it. Maybe the homosexual urges thing was too much. She stops typing for a moment. Why do I always go right to that? Rushing past Aaron, who is standing just outside the door, Jeremy doesn't say anything. With a few double-time steps, Aaron catches up with him and grabs him tightly around his arm. "What did she say?" she asks Jeremy, who doesn't respond in words. With no warning, Jeremy turns and presses his lips to Aaron's, with such great passion that her legs begin to buckle under the weight of it. Removing his face from hers, Jeremy stares into her eyes, still caught deep in their kiss for a moment. "I'm not gay," he says to himself as he releases her and makes his way toward the main entrance of the school. Finally shaking off their physical exchange, Aaron's face shows concern. "Wait, what?" she calls out to him as she chases him down. They both quickly make their way through the main doors and off the school's property. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying the story and how it's going, please subscribe so you can get every chapter as it comes through. Discuss in the comments, plot threads, and where you think the story's going. Share with anybody you think might find it interesting. Until then, I'll see you next video.